All right. As Simon said, my name is Ryan Bird. I'm a recent graduate of the University of Oklahoma, and this paper is based upon the research I conducted for a capstone project that I was doing during my last year of undergraduate studies. So I want to begin by describing the nature of my work in geohumanities, sound, and the idea of attunement that's going to be the focus of this paper. Geohumanities has been described by my mentor, Dr. Nick Bauk, as the intersection of geography and the creative arts, which emphasizes interdisciplinary radical production geared towards generating new forms and methods of knowledge. This leads to different understandings of the world and its phenomena, such as climate change. Sound, as a medium and method of communication, is ambiguous. Often, we do not immediately understand basic information about the sounds we perceive, such as their content and context. But within this confusion and ambiguity lies potential. The voice that creates sound might represent a phenomenon that we as human beings do not typically encounter or consider. In recognizing and adjusting to hear or otherwise perceive these voices, we attune to them. There are four main notions of attunement. The first derives from Kant and his use of the musical term Stimmung, typically translated into English as harmony. Think of it like the romantic idea of experiencing beauty or the Kantian sublime. The second notion of attunement was developed by Heidegger and relates to a preconscious affect, a tuning of being, where we as humans calibrate ourselves to hear and experience in certain ways and ruin these affects when we become aware of them. The third notion posits attunement as a process similar to empathy. It's an embodied mechanism through which we track emotion. The fourth idea of attunement is the one I focus on in this presentation. Recall that the term Stimmung is the origins of the first Kantian notion of attunement based on harmonious beauty. The translation of Stimmung into the English word harmony erases definitions of the term which relate to orienting oneself to dissonance or tension present in sound. This violence in translation that obscures this definition is one of the characteristics of geopolitical sound, according to Anna Kanizer. By this understanding, attuning to sound opens up potentials of understanding that are in tension with the lived human experience. Phenomena such as climate and climate change occupy a spatio-temporal area that is hard to imagine in human terms. This is due to factors such as climate affecting the entire geospatial area of Earth in large and small detail, and it's occurring on a timescale that humans are not used to considering. Thus, to properly conceive of climate change requires a more than human perspective. But to get from our human perspective towards this more than human one requires a mechanism to mediate this difference, such as sound. For the rest of this paper, I explore attunement, apocalypse, and climate change within 3 songs, including their relationship to depicting climate change as an apocalypse. The first song I've examined is Idiotic by Radiohead from their 2000 album Kid A. Before I play a segment of the song for reference, I want to state that Idiotic is quite experimental. Dadaist composition techniques were employed to disrupt storytelling arcs, and climate change as a subject is addressed only implicitly, not directly. And on a technical note, due to copyright restrictions, I can only play this and other segments to the live audience. Sorry for streamers. With that in mind, here is a segment of Idiotic. Within that segment and the rest of the song, we get a sense of apocalyptic climate change as overwhelming. Tom sings elsewhere, "I have seen too much," euphemizing death and other hysteria with the lines, "I'll laugh until my head comes off, I'll swallow until I burst." There's also a lyric question earlier of who's in the bunker? In that question, another line, "Women and children first," is a sense of urgent evacuation for safety. Whatever this climatic threat is coming soon and we need to prepare. As you heard in the instrumentation and the singing of frontman Tom York, there is also a large amount of tension and anxiety produced in Idiotic. One source is technology. The electronic instruments played by the band do it in an abstract sense. And also the line, mobiles squirking, mobiles chirping, heard in that segment reflects the idea that noise and distraction produced by cell phones and other devices might stop us from acting. Corporate influences are also a huge source of concern, with Naomi Klein's book, No Logo, a major thematic influence on Radiohead while creating Kid A. The line, take the money and run, that you heard reflects this sentiment of corporate entities causing climate change and then shirking responsibility for its effects. These attempts to cover up and spread denial of climate change in debates appears in the line, let me hear both sides, which suggests an exploitation of media fairness norms to create a false impression regarding the consensus about anthropogenic causes of climate change. These lyrics and sounds reveal an inequality of agency among actors, one geopolitical notion of sound. The anxiety and complexity surrounding climate change feeds into the fear Radiohead has that we will not adequately address the issue. This most clearly occurs in the projected lyric, we're not scaremongering, this is really happening. And while it is certainly possible that destructive policies and consumption habits can be stopped, reversed, or otherwise altered, but distractions, vested interests, and a general disinterest work against addressing a fairly complicated and abstract phenomenon like climate change. And so these geopolitical inequalities hinder agency and capacity. A climate change apocalypse is coming, and though we can't stop it, Radiohead fears we won't. 16 years later, and after far more change and development than I could describe at this moment, both musically and environmentally, Radiohead released the song The Numbers as part of their album Moon-Shaped Pool. Like Idiotic, climate change is not directly referenced in The Numbers. Frontman Tom York debuted the song during a solo benefit concert for 350.org during the talks that led to the Paris Climate Accords, however, which suggests that The Numbers is about climate change. And so, like with Idiotic, here is a segment which gets at this, if I can get the mouse to work on that. The Numbers' opening lyrics, it holds us like a phantom, it touches like a breeze, it shines its understanding, reference climate change and this process of attunement. Assuming it to be climate change, these lines address the difficulties of properly perceiving climate change that is understood through vague and discomforting dissonant mechanisms. The next lines, open on all channels, ready to receive, reflect such a need for attunement and a flexible capacity to perceive the truth of climate change by peculiar means. These perceptive capacities are reinforced elsewhere in the Numbers, lyrics including, we're not at the mercy of your chimeras and spells, and the future is inside us, it's not somewhere else, demonstrate not only a perceptual capacity relating to climate change, but a capacity for agency to combat climate change. This is a near complete reversal from the climate change present in Idiotic. While climate change might still be an overwhelming and anxiety-inducing phenomenon, it is also actionable. The issue of directness in discussing climate change also carries over from Idiotic into the Numbers. Tom York sings, we call upon the people have this power, the numbers don't decide, your system is a lie. And later on, also not heard in what I played, we'll take back what is ours, one day at a time. These lines lead closer to political speech than singing or storytelling, but the Numbers is less call to arms and reassurance that victory will come. The quieted confidence of the instrumentation reflects this. This idea of action is reflected in Kanye West's proposition of imperceptibility. To quote her, There's a need for slower, more careful, reflective, and different kinds of activism to deal with gradual and less visible processes. Climate change is one of these processes, and the numbers reveals this idea through sound. Also within the lyrics of the numbers is an idea of commons and common interests. Tom York, the frontman, sings of a collective, indeterminate we in conflict with the you opposed to our interests. Kanye writes that the idea of sound as a commons reveals, quote unquote, the world is not for humans, the world is rather with humans, a relation that is not without antagonism. Tom York sings, we are of the earth, to her we do return, underscoring the tension in this multidimensional conflict, and I believe touching on the idea of Gaia that came up in the keynote speech before me. Finally, the imagery of the numbers as lyrics is interesting not for what it contains, but what it doesn't contain. Unlike idiotic, there is not anything within the numbers that suggests climate change as apocalyptic. While it might remain somewhat unknowable in the numbers, it is perceptible and actionable. Apocalypse is rejected in favor of recognizing agency and empowering others to act to prevent an apocalypse from occurring. While Radiohead's changing understanding on climate change provides a different and welcome perspective from earlier narratives, theirs is not the only one. Although Radiohead have abandoned apocalypse and direct action in their work, they remain useful constructs. My final song, 4 Degrees by Anony, from her 2016 album Hopelessness, presents a quite different picture of climate change. Anony explicitly wrote that 4 Degrees is a first-person attempt at self-criticism for not being accountable enough for her role in causing climate change. The title refers to the estimated average temperature rise predicted to occur this century, driving 1/6 of the Earth's species to extinction. Here is a segment of 4 Degrees that gets at that. 4 Degrees portrays climate change as a violent, fiery apocalypse. Oceans boil, animals burn to death, and at the most dramatic point in the song, Anony bellows, I want to burn the sky, I want to burn the breeze. This directness is a massive change, as you can tell from Radiohead's vagaries. 4 Degrees also examines the world through a human-focused lens. The instrumentation simulates a string orchestra, yet maintains a synthetic edge, and similarly, the mid-range singing of Anony sounds somewhat unnatural for a variety of reasons. These two elements remind us that the natural environment is truly human-managed. The song also references dogs, fish, rhinos, and lemurs dying from climate change. As charismatic megafauna, these species elicit stronger affective responses from humans than other organisms. Anony uses the first person not to place herself as a witness to this violence, but to close any distance and recognize her role as perpetrator. 4 Degrees begins with the lyrics, I want to see the world, I want to see it boil, and ends, I want to burn them. This violence occurs remarkably easily. It's only 4 Degrees is more than just the title by which we frame the song. It's repeated within there 20 times. This frequency diminishes and familiarizes the line within the listener, making the process go from a large abstract impossibility to a small, easily accomplishable one. Annie is asking, if this will happen, why wait? This desire for apocalypse, death, and destruction is unsettling as someone who considers herself an environmental activist like Anony. Why sing about your subject in a manner antithetical to your worldview? It's because these lyrics are meant to be interpreted in a sense like a Trojan horse and provoke the opposite action within its listeners. If you're not going to take preventing climate change seriously, this argument goes, you might as well light animals on fire. But who wants that? This dissonant yet coherent message on climate change within 4 Degrees helps us recognize the otherwise imperceptible through ideas of interspecies inequality, commons, and futures within geopolitical sound. Now, Anani's 4 Degrees and Radiohead's The Numbers have been compared a lot to one another, not only because they were released within a month of each other, first as their premiere and then on their respective albums. The two songs examine similar phenomena from drastically different perspectives, and understanding these differences helps us better understand the music itself and the environmental politics contained within them. Within the popular music sphere that Radiohead and Anani occupy, music is received subjectively better if it's considered authentic. An artist in their work is authentic in this understanding if it is serious, aware of its role within the late capitalist music landscape, and positioned such that it resists the artistic or ethical compromises known as selling out. But the idea of selling out in music is not limited to subjective judgment of the music itself. It includes the artist's operation in the wider music economy. Radiohead toured Kid A by staging concerts in blank canvas tents, somewhat similar to the one we're in right now, to avoid corporate-sponsored music venues. Earlier this year, however, in promoting A Moon-Shaped Pool, the album The Numbers comes from, Radiohead headlined Coachella. It's a massive music festival in California. And this proved to be controversial as Coachella's corporate CEO has financed conservative political groups which advance climate change denial agendas. And while this does not mean that Radiohead has necessarily given up on fighting climate change and being political actors in this sense, it does signal resignation or exhaustion with direct action, as some music critics noted within The Numbers and the music of A Moon-Shaped Pool more generally. Anani responded differently to ethical dilemmas facing her work in this manner. She came to regret accepting money from Apple to produce a music video for the Apple Music platform, stating that she was bought as a politically spoken artist to further enable Apple's disrupting of the music economy. But this supposed greater authenticity of Anani is not the full picture of this debate. In defending Radiohead's actions, the writer Marvin Lin argued that Radiohead's working within the music industry with a greater complicity or other hypocrisy allows them nonetheless to communicate their beliefs more widely, such as by promoting the work of Naomi Klein. I should note that this argument was published within 2010 and covering Radiohead's actions in the early 2000s, yet remains relevant to this day. This contrast also mirrors broader, long-standing debates within environmentalism about whether the movements should institutionalize themselves and work from within different structures or remain outsiders to these established systems. Applying this debate to Radiohead and Anani, we see a split that is not just about politics, but further relates to the artists' identities. In an interview, Radiohead frontman Tom York explicitly stated he cannot write good music directly about climate change in the form of a protest song. The resulting indirectness that we get in songs like The Numbers isn't necessarily bad, however. It seeds the grounds of direct action to other persons and identities, and Anani, a transgender female artist I should note, benefits from this indirectness. The greater precarity of Anani's lived existence means she probably has not had the luxury of critical distance from politics, which resultingly would impact her own thoughts and speech. As one anonymous music critic argued, the inversion present within 4 Degrees also inverts the logic of identity politics, the personal is political type thoughts, which means that Anani, as a result, discusses climate change in direct and personal terms. This is not unwelcome. In another review of Anani's music published in The Quietus, there's this quote that I like in there. There's been plenty of time for bearded boys to pontificate over world events in broad brush reifications, and perhaps it offers the listener very little in the way of agency. With hopelessness, the messages are clear and direct, even when they present something with an ambiguous flourish, and the question rapidly becomes what is to be done in the face of them. This diversity in perspective and experience embodied in sound related to climate change offers different pathways to understanding and action, and certainly this tension ought to be productive rather than destructive. To conclude, music and other phenomena of sound enable the development of awareness and understanding of objects and events such as a changing climate. By recognizing and orienting the sound's embodied dissonance and tension. Because attunement relates individuals to larger phenomena in a transitory experience, communicating through an ambiguous medium like sound, it is subjective and might be difficult to realize. Text such as song lyrics and other information content needs to supplement or otherwise guide these explorations. The discussed songs of Radiohead and Entity demonstrate that themes of climate change and apocalypse utilize attunement in a variety of messaging formats. Though my paper explored the performance of listening to studio versions of songs, other songs or genres of music also offer potentials for attunement. And other experiences sound, such as installation pieces, concerts, or non-musical sound, could do similar work. The limits to these approaches must be recognized. Immediately after Tom York, the frontman of Radiohead, said he cannot write directly about climate change, he remarked, "It's not like one song or one piece of art or one book is going to change someone's mind. Indeed, if only it were that simple." Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Questions for Ryan? Tristan.
Great paper, Ryan.
Thank you.
I just had a question about Anony, who, was it your interpretation, or did you listen to an interview with Anony about that song? Because I think one other way, and the only reason I ask this is because another way to interpret it is since around 2000, 2005, there's been a number of radical scholars who have actually advocated a climate apocalypse. To kind of bring in a socialist revolution through the back door of a climate apocalypse where capitalism won't be able to abide, right, or won't be able to continue on when things get to 4 degrees, and potentially for some radical scholars this could be perceived as a welcomed event. Is it possible she's interpreting that or reading through that literature? I mean, even Naomi Klein has edged close to that kind of logic, hasn't she?
Well, I'm not terribly familiar itself with Naomi Klein's work, even though I probably should be for as much as I'm a fan of Radiohead. But to get back to your point, she did conduct an interview with a fan forum, which said that basically she was inverting the tropes and relying sort of on invoking the apocalypse to try to spur action to fight it. She's done other work in promoting it and criticizing other groups to work on it. So she's obviously being sincere in her songs, but the message is still inverted. It's not meant, I don't think, to want to bring about the apocalypse. It's to want to prevent it.
Okay, thank you.
Katerina, and then I'll come to you, Ariel.
Thank you. I think that was an excellent paper, and I sort of will discuss somewhat similar issues from literature, and I know virtually nothing about music, so this was really very insightful, I thought. Is there anything you can say about the reception? I mean, that's sort of a literature question. I mean, how either critics, but also sort of the general audience, how do you know anything about how they respond to these messages? I mean, does it translate into action or more awareness? I know this is kind of a different, kind of a fuzzy question, but I'm just wondering whether you have any information about that.
Well, in creating the presentation that I did, it was part of a wider research project. So that involved going into databases, looking at critics' reviews, something like 20 for each artist or so. And it was generally these reviews consist of albums, and they were received positively in the sense that I guess more like they like the music. I think it's harder to exactly gauge the impact that the activism the artists have done within their music and other venues. I'm thinking of different protests Anony and frontman Tom York have done. That wasn't what I had focused on so much as analyzing the music itself. But I do think in communicating with a large-scale audience like Radiohead and Anony often do when you're playing concert venues and stuff like that, that's quite important for mass mobilization and sort of keeping up morale and encouraging others to act.
Thank you. It was a fascinating, thought-provoking paper. So, historians type question then. Radiohead's last album to me would be late Radiohead. So, is there anything in earlier Radiohead, Ben's OK Computer, where you can see similar concerns? Is there an evolution? The serious question is there an evolution of ideas? Is this stuff present in the early material? Is it only present in the later material? And you mentioned Naomi Klein. Is there source material that's influencing them that's then coming through the music?
Well, I think it's natural for artists like Radiohead and stuff. Like, you do see Well, you do see in the evolution of sound, like OK Computer doesn't sound the same as a moon-shaped pool and all of that.
But are the same environmental concerns present in these earlier works, or is it a later development?
I think it's a development that really came through in creating Kid A. I haven't exactly thoroughly examined the entire back catalog of Radiohead, so I can't exactly say if there are environmental messages on Pablo Honey or the Bends or anything like that. But you really see sort of the break in Radiohead in OK Computer, where you start seeing the political activism along a number of different fronts that have gone primarily from OK Computer to, I guess, I want to say Hail to the Thief, which was hugely critical of President George Bush. And I think those concerns have receded. In the interview I've mentioned of Tom York, he sort of disavowed that he considered himself an activist and stuff. So I think there is a change, and I'm not necessarily sure if it's good or bad.
And are you able to explain what the trigger is between the Bends and OK Computer?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Are you able to explain why there is a shift, why there is that transition?
I think the shift in terms of that, when you look at it, Radiohead was given a lot of more artistic freedom to create a new product with OK Computer due to the success that they had had in the Bends and that. So they sort of used it to leverage it into the more experimental work that they had been going off of. I can't entirely say if the activism itself also emerged out of this period or if it's a longer one, because that's simply not something I have really examined.
We have time for one more very quick question. Anybody? Okay. Thank you very much, Ryan.